Today, we're going to talk about Mexico, but we won't be focusing on its popular tourist destinations, its stunning beaches, or its vibrant culture. Instead, we'll be discussing one of the most complex and bloodiest security crises in the world, one that Mexico has been grappling with for the past 2 decades. Because since 2006, hundreds of thousands of people have tragically lost their lives in the violent incidents that have occurred in Mexico. More than 100,000 individuals are officially registered as missing. So, how exactly did we arrive at this devastating point? It all actually began back in the 1980s as the demand for cocaine in the United States rapidly escalated. Producers in Colombia began actively seeking new routes to transport the illicit drug northward. Due to its geographical position, Mexico emerged as the most ideal transit point. Initially, Mexican groups were solely involved in handling the transportation of these drugs. They were essentially providing logistical services. But over time, they came to realize something. Instead of merely transporting goods, they could earn significantly more if they controlled the entire chain, from production all the way to distribution. This decision, in fact, laid the foundation for the modern cartel system. Among the organizations that gained significant power during this period was the Sinaloa Kartel, and one of its most notorious leaders was Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. However, there's an interesting point. In the 1990s and early 2000s, violence was not as widespread and uncontrolled as it is today because the system was largely founded on a balance. There was corruption. Some elements within the state were cooperating with cartels. Regions were divided. So, there was a structure in existence that was dirty, yet quite stable. This particular structure, however, was disrupted in the year 2006. In 2006, President Felipe Calderón, upon taking office, declared a direct war against the cartels. The military was deployed to the streets. Tens of thousands of soldiers were assigned to duty in urban centers. The objective was to dismantle the cartels and to bring down their central organizational structures. It seemed like a perfectly logical move at first glance, but the result turned out to be entirely the reverse. Its major cartels lost their leaders. They began to fragment. These fragmented structures then transformed into smaller, more aggressive groups. Each of these groups then fought to control more territory, and the violence spread wave after wave. The apprehension of a cartel leader no longer brought about stability. Rather, it invariably signaled the beginning of a new and intense conflict. Among the most significant new organizations that rose to prominence throughout this process was the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, or cjng. This organization was distinct from the typical cartel structure. It was significantly more militarized and highly organized. They utilized social media as a propaganda instrument. They produced armored vehicles and were able to block city entrances with their convoys. On some regions, they managed to establish control not only over the drug trade, but also over the entire economy. Protection money was collected from businesses. Pressure was exerted upon local politics. Open confrontations broke out with rival groups. At this point, the matter was no longer simply about drugs. It had truly become a battle for power. But the heaviest price was paid by civilians. According to official figures, there are more than 100,000 missing people. Tens of thousands of murders are committed every year. In some cities, people choose not to venture outside after a certain hour in the evening. In some regions, journalists are putting their lives at risk when they report the news, because cartels govern not only through the power of weapons, but also through the pervasive power of fear. And fear is one of the most effective mechanisms of control. In recent years, the government has attempted to shift its strategy. Less direct confrontation, a greater emphasis on social policy was adopted. However, the problem is that cartels are no longer solely involved in drug trafficking. They are involved in fentanyl production, human trafficking, fuel theft, and in some areas they even exert local economic control. These structures have transformed into complex, multifaceted criminal organizations, and these organizations are now fully integrated into the global market. So, this is not merely a problem that concerns Mexico alone. The drug crisis in the United States, border security debates, and the waves of migration are all directly connected to this very system. Today, Mexico finds itself living between two very different realities. On one side, there's tourism, culture, art, and a thriving economy. On the other side, we're seeing organized crime networks and regional conflicts. The state itself hasn't completely collapsed. However, in some regions, control is very much contested. And the crucial question now is, can this war truly be won, or has this become a permanent balance of power? In 2023 and 2024, the state of Sinaloa was gripped by significant internal tensions. The balance of power dramatically shifted after Joaquin El Chapo Guzman's extradition to the United States. Subsequently, his son Ovidio Guzman was apprehended. This incident triggered widespread clashes in Culiacan, where roads were blocked and numerous vehicles were set ablaze.
The city was practically brought to a standstill for hours. The government then initiated a major operation, and the cartels quickly retaliated.
These scenes are no longer an exception. In some cities, when security forces conduct operations, the public retreats to their homes. Mexico's security problem also significantly impacts migration. Migrants arriving from Central America are passing through Mexico. Cartels are controlling these passages in certain regions. Human trafficking has become a completely separate source of income. The crisis at the US border is not merely a migration issue, but it's also an integral part of the organized crime economy. Perhaps the most critical point to consider is this: violence is becoming increasingly normalized. Road closures in a city, conflict in a region, the capture of a leader. These things have now become a regular part of the daily news cycle, and that is precisely what makes it so dangerous, because the longer a crisis persists, the more people tend to grow accustomed to it. In recent years, there has been a significant discussion gaining traction in America. Some politicians are now openly and quite explicitly raising the question: should the United States military intervene against the drug cartels in Mexico? Here, this is no longer a scenario discussed only behind closed doors. Members of Congress, presidential candidates, and national security advisors have openly debated declaring Mexican cartels foreign terrorist organizations. What exactly does this imply? It means establishing a legal basis for the United States to conduct cross-border operations. So, theoretically, a targeted military operation taking place on Mexican soil. Now, let's be honest with ourselves. Why exactly is this discussion flaring up so intensely right now? It's because the fentanyl crisis in the United States has unfortunately become a major election issue. During every single election cycle, border security is discussed more loudly and prominently, and cartels have firmly established themselves at the very center of this political narrative. But this particular question is generally not asked: if there were no demand, would there truly be a supply? The United States is one of the world's largest drug markets, and cartels are actively responding to this demand. So, the crisis is not simply one-sided, it's an intricately interconnected system between these two nations. Now, consider, if the US conducts a unilateral operation, how would Mexico react? Would military tension arise between the two neighboring countries, or is intelligence cooperation already underway behind the scenes? Are official statements and the reality on the ground always the same? There are no definitive answers to these questions. However, one thing is undeniably clear: the cartel crisis in Mexico is no longer solely Mexico's problem. There is an issue that has become firmly established at the very core of North American security architecture. And if diplomacy fails to yield a resolution, this discussion is bound to intensify even further.
Peki
So,
ya,
what are your
sizin
thoughts on this
düşünceleriniz
matter?
neler?
Let's connect in the comment
Yorumlarda
section
buluşalım.
below.
Unutmadan şunu da
let me just
ekleyelim.
add this.
Videoyu
If you enjoyed the
beğendiyseniz
video,
beğenip
please don't forget
abone
to
olmayı
like and
unutmayın.
subscribe.